Today we will be covering two horrible caving tragedies. In the first, a diver trapped deep beneath the surface fights to reach safety as his oxygen runs out fast. And in the second, a sudden cave collapse sends an explorer plunging miles into darkness. As always, viewer discretion is advised.
August 23, 2003. Three friends gathered at the entrance of Rubidoux Spring Cave in Missouri, preparing for an adventure they had looked forward to for weeks. Stephen Hyra, a 50-year-old diving enthusiast, carefully checked his equipment one last time, while his companions, Ron Shirley and John Davis, did the same. The men were eager to explore the legendary Big Room, a massive chamber hidden deep within the underwater cave system. Each diver carried specialized certificates clipped to their gear bags, proof that they met the strict requirements needed for access to this dangerous site. Rubidoux Spring Cave was no place for beginners. Its dark, winding passages stretched far beneath the surface, with the Big Room located nearly 1,400 feet and sitting at a depth of 165 feet, or 50 meters, below the water. This was the kind of cave diving that demanded experience, careful planning, and absolute respect for the risks that lay ahead. The three friends had carefully mapped out every part of their adventure. Their plan was to enter the cave using special breathing mixtures made for deep diving, navigate the winding tunnels with underwater scooters, reach the legendary Big Room to take in its hidden beauty, and then return safely to the surface. To make the journey possible, they would need to make several stops along the way, slowly adjusting to the changes in pressure, a process divers call decompression. Stephen, Ron, and John prepared themselves with precision. Each man wore a dry suit designed to shield against the cave's frigid 50-degree water, about 10 degrees C. Unlike standard wetsuits, dry suits kept them completely dry, with only their faces exposed. Underneath, they layered insulating clothing to hold in body heat for the long, grueling dive ahead. Their gear was extensive, carefully chosen, and built specifically for the challenges of cave exploration. Each of the men carried double tanks strapped to their backs, filled with trimix, a carefully balanced blend of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium. Along with those, they had extra stage bottles, one filled with trimix and another with nitrox, a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen. These additional tanks would be switched out at different points in the dive, making sure they always had the right breathing gas for their depth and activity. But the most thrilling part of their gear was the underwater scooters. These powerful handheld machines would pull them effortlessly through the passages, helping conserve both energy and air supply. For Stephen, it was especially exciting. This was his very first time using a scooter on a dive, and it added a whole new edge to the adventure. When they finally entered the water, the surface rippled around them before calming again. The spring pool at the cave's entrance was crystal clear, mirroring the blue sky above. But the divers knew that clarity wouldn't last. Once inside, even the slightest movement could stir up silt and reduce visibility to almost nothing. Their plan, however, was solid. The first phase was to breathe from their nitrox tanks while making their way to a chamber known as the drop-off, about 350 feet into the cave at a depth of 50 feet. At this crucial waypoint, the cave floor dropped sharply, plunging from 50 feet down to around 135 feet, or 41 meters. This was the spot where they would leave their nitrox tanks behind to be used later on their return trip. Switching over to their Trimix travel tanks, the men prepared for the next stage of their journey. With scooters in hand, they would race through the lower tunnel, a passage known as Wichow Avenue, stretching nearly 1,100 feet or 335 meters toward the Big Room. This tunnel sat at an average depth of 150 feet or 46 meters, and in many areas offered only about 4.5 feet or 1.4 meters of clearance. One by one, the three divers slipped below the surface and descended into the silent underwater world. They clipped themselves to the permanent guideline, a safety rope anchored about 75 feet from the entrance. That line was their lifeline, marking the path in and out should visibility suddenly drop to nothing. Then, with a soft hum, they powered on their scooters. Instantly, the devices surged forward, pulling them effortlessly through the passage. The darkness around them broke into the beams of their powerful underwater lights, which swept across the cave walls, revealing strange and mesmerizing formations hidden deep below the earth. Limestone formations carved over thousands of years line the tunnel walls, creating an almost alien world of mineral shapes sculpted by water through endless centuries. After traveling about 300 feet through the upper passage, just as they had planned, each man placed a tank at 70 feet or 21 meters to be used later during their return trip.
From there, the three friends descended further into the lower tunnel known as WEDGED Avenue. The passage tightened as they went deeper, the ceiling dipping low at times, forcing them to duck their heads. Their lights swept across strange rock formations and occasionally caught glimpses of rare cave-dwelling creatures specially adapted to survive in this dark and silent world. But unknown to Ron and John, Stephen had already run into trouble. His stage bottle was draining far quicker than expected, maybe because he was using more air while adjusting to the new scooter, or perhaps because of a problem with his equipment. Either way, his gas was running low. Without saying a word, Stephen switched over to his back-mounted tanks earlier than planned and pressed forward with the group. At last, the big room came into view. Its massive size was staggering, a sudden contrast to the narrow tunnel they had just fought through. Even the beams from their powerful lights couldn't reach the farthest corners of this hidden underground chamber. The three divers paused, taking a moment to admire the breathtaking sight before them. Few people on Earth had ever seen this hidden underground wonder. But time was limited. Careful of their air supplies and aware of the long journey back, they soon signaled to one another it was time to turn around. As they began the return through WEDGED Avenue, Stephen glanced at the pressure gauge on his tanks. What he saw was alarming. The needle had dropped to just 500 psi, far less than he should have had at this stage of the dive. Considering a properly filled scuba tank usually starts at about 3,000 psi, or 207 bar, Stephen had already burned through nearly 85% of his supply. Understanding the seriousness, he quickly signaled to Ron, showing him the gauge. Without hesitation, Ron offered his backup regulator, attached to a long hose made exactly for emergencies like this. Thanks to Ron's quick thinking and strict safety training, Stephen was able to keep moving, now sharing air directly from his friend's tank. But as they swam, new difficulties surfaced. Stephen began losing control of his buoyancy, the skill that allows a diver to stay steady at the right depth. He rose too high, then sank too low, making steady progress harder with every kick. Ahead of them, John, unaware of Stephen's troubles, continued on through the passage. Even so, Stephen and Ron managed to reach the end of the lower tunnel, still at a depth of 135 feet, or 41 meters, and began their climb up the drop-off. But as they rose past the 100-foot mark, around 30 meters, Stephen's buoyancy problems only grew worse, threatening to spiral out of control. Stephen suddenly began floating upward, rising faster than Ron could follow. The long hose that connected him to Ron's air supply stretched to its limit, and then, with a sharp tug, the regulator was pulled from his mouth. In the dim light, Stephen quickly swam back down, grabbing Ron's backup regulator. He took a few breaths, then gave the reassuring, "Okay" hand signal, the silent language divers used beneath the water. Meanwhile, Ron fumbled to locate his own primary regulator, the one that had been yanked away during the struggle. But when he looked up again, Stephen was gone. The commotion had stirred up silt from the cave floor, clouding the water and cutting visibility down to almost nothing. Ron pressed on, continuing his ascent toward the decompression stop at 70 feet, or 21 meters, where they had staged their bottles earlier. John had already retrieved his and moved ahead, but Stephen's bottle was still sitting there beside Ron's. With no sign of his friend and his concern rising with every passing second, Ron collected his own decompression bottle and swam toward the entrance, clinging to the hope that Stephen had managed to link up with another group of divers he had briefly seen passing through the cave. When Ron finally broke the surface, his worst fears spilled out in an urgent report. Stephen was missing. Immediate rescue efforts were launched. Divers rushed into the cave, their light slicing through the darkness as they searched.
And then, in the very place Ron had last seen him, they found Stephen. His body was floating near the ceiling of the tunnel. All three of his tanks were empty. Even more chilling, the exhaust valve on his dry suit, a mechanism meant to vent expanding air, was discovered completely closed. It was a critical detail that explained Stephen's struggles with buoyancy. What had begun as a day filled with excitement and promise had ended in heartbreaking tragedy. Later analysis revealed that a chain of small problems had cascaded into disaster. Stephen's regulator may have been set too sensitively, allowing precious air to leak unnoticed. The steady hum of the scooter could have masked the sound of that leak. The closed exhaust valve on his dry suit had made it almost impossible to control his buoyancy. And perhaps most importantly, there had been miscommunication between the three divers about just how serious Stephen's situation had become.
October 17, 2009, 4 experienced cavers led by 45-year-old John Haber entered Fang Cave through the middle entrance. Alongside John were Mike Nash and 2 Alpine Club members, all seasoned explorers familiar with the underground labyrinth. What started as a routine expedition into the dark tunnels would soon spiral into a fight for survival. Reaching the middle entrance, the team began their descent. They rigged the entrance pitch into the Colosseum, a vast chamber deep inside the cave, using an existing bolt hanger and a camming device. A doubled 9mm dynamic rope secured their way down safely. After reaching the spacious Colosseum, they pushed forward into the corkscrew, a steep, twisting passage packed with vertical drops. 10 feet above a narrow ledge near the top, they placed a camming device into a crack, securing the rope for controlled movement. This setup allowed 2 cavers to ascend or descend simultaneously while ensuring safety at every step. The team reached the base of the corkscrew, a demanding section that tested their skills. They knew they were entering the deeper parts of Fang Cave. While the upper corkscrew was tricky, the lower section was steeper and tighter, forcing them to shift carefully through narrow spaces. After navigating the cramped passage, they arrived at the farthest point planned for exploration. The cave's walls pressed closer, and the air felt heavier. They exchanged quiet looks, satisfied with reaching their goal, but aware the ascent ahead would be even harder. So far, everything was going smoothly. As seasoned cavers, the tight spaces and sharp turns were familiar territory. The return journey would be far more challenging, requiring them to ascend the same steep passages they had just ascended. John Haber, leading the group, went first. With deliberate movements, he started up the corkscrew, slowly working his way through the narrow twists and turns. Every handhold and foothold had to be precise. There was no room for error in such confined spaces. When John reached the section where the Rabel cam had been anchored, he paused. Something didn't look right. The cam, which secured the rope in a crack in the rock, had shifted slightly from its original position. If it failed, the entire team's safety could be at risk. Staying calm, John carefully repositioned the cam and re-anchored it, making sure the rope was stable. Confident in his adjustment, he called down to Mike Nash, signaling him to begin his ascent, a routine practice in vertical caving. Mike clipped in and began to climb, trusting the setup. But almost immediately, disaster struck. As soon as Nash's weight loaded the rope, a sharp cracking sound echoed through the chamber. The pressure from his weight caused the flake of rock holding the cam to suddenly shear off. In an instant, the large rock slab tore free, crashing down into the darkness below. The cave went silent, except for the unsettling sound of loose debris still tumbling deeper into the abyss. The impact was devastating. The massive rock flake came crashing down with unimaginable force, slamming into John and knocking him violently onto the narrow ledge below. In an instant, he was trapped beneath the colossal weight. The thunderous sound of rock meeting flesh echoed through the cave's twisting chambers, sending a jolt of panic through the rest of the team. They scrambled toward the source of the crash, their headlamps slicing through the darkness, hearts pounding with dread. When they reached John, the sight froze them in horror.
Acting on pure adrenaline, the group threw themselves at the rock, straining with every ounce of strength they had. After several grueling moments, they managed to free him, dragging his limp body away from the pool. But the relief was short-lived. John remained unresponsive, his chest unnaturally still. Then came the harsh reality of his injuries. The rock's crushing weight had wreaked havoc on his body. 7 ribs shattered on his right side, 3 more on his left, a broken collarbone, a fractured clavicle, and a collapsed lung.
His right shoulder and hand were mangled beyond recognition. He was fighting for his life in the depths of a cave where help was hours, if not days, away. The team suspected a possible spinal injury but couldn't confirm. Amid the chaos, they checked for vital signs and found he wasn't breathing. CPR began immediately. Their fast response saved him as he slowly regained consciousness, though his injuries were severe. Just before the accident, another group led by Tamara Costa had entered the cave. It included 3 new cavers, familiar with the system but unaware of the ongoing incident. As Costa's team reached the Colosseum, they were told the first group would be delayed due to the ascension process. Costa chose to continue exploring, but upon reaching the corkscrew, realized they didn't have enough rope for the descent. She called off the plan and started leading her team back toward the entrance. As Costa's team was exiting the cave, a member of the Alpine Club rushed to them, shouting that someone had been crushed by a rock and was in critical condition. Realizing the severity, Costa instructed one of her team members to retrieve the satellite phone at the cave entrance, essential for contacting emergency services. Once the phone arrived, Costa called a Global Star Center in Texas, which relayed the message to the RCMP in Prince George. This triggered a full-scale search and rescue operation, mobilizing multiple teams, including the British Columbia Cave Rescue, BCCR, who would play a crucial role in saving John. While waiting for help, Costa worked to keep John comfortable. She had extra clothing brought in, moved him out of the cold water, and placed him in a semi-sitting position to preserve warmth. Despite the chaos, Costa stayed calm and focused on John's care until rescuers arrived. The rescue operation officially began around 7 p.m. when 2 helicopters arrived carrying rescue personnel and vital equipment to the site. By then, John's condition had worsened. He had lost consciousness again, and his breathing grew shallow and labored, leaving the team gravely concerned for his life. At 8:15 p.m., rescuers carefully began moving John using a spinal immobilization device. He was secured in a Furno, Washington stretcher, specifically designed to protect his spine and prevent any further damage. Using a network of specialized rigging systems and pulleys, the team initiated the painstaking ascent out of the cave. By 9:30 p.m., the stretcher reached an area known as the Colosseum, where rescuers observed a slight improvement in John's breathing when his head was kept elevated. They propped the stretcher against a large boulder, applied heat pads, and adjusted his position to keep him as comfortable as possible. Despite his devastating injuries, John remained conscious, his determination to survive clear in every strained breath and flicker of awareness. By 9:30 p.m., the rescue team finally reached the middle entrance of the cave. John was still in critical condition, but he was stable enough to begin the next phase of the operation, the long, grueling journey back to the surface. From there, a 3-hour haul down the rugged mountain awaited as rescuers carefully carried John to a location where he could be safely airlifted. Exhaustion was setting in, but nobody slowed down. Every minute mattered. The team knew that their relentless effort was the only thing standing between John and death. After hours of back-breaking work, John was finally transferred into an awaiting helicopter and flown to safety. On arrival at the hospital, doctors confirmed the extent of his injuries: 7 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and multiple other fractures. It was a devastating list, but thanks to the swift and highly coordinated rescue operation, John had survived. The mission had required multiple rescue teams, helicopters, and specialized equipment, all working seamlessly together to pull off what many thought was impossible. After 2 tense days in intensive care, John's condition stabilized. His road to recovery was long and painful, but ultimately he made it. Against all odds, he returned to living a normal life.